So, what make springs special to manatees? Ron mentioned that manatees are at the northern extreme of their range. They're a tropical species. They have 1 degrees Fahrenheit to survive. They don't have really good metabolic mechanisms to produce heat like we do. We can shiver and shake. You know, some of us are particularly hairy. Others are not. We can alter our behavior a little bit to be able to stay warm. They can't do that. Most of the spring systems that manatees use have a consistent high volume. They tend to be first and second magnitude springs. However, third magnitude springs and even little, cracks or fissures, a single manatee will find in a very cold period of time. But we get large concentrations of manatees in these better areas. Obviously, the approximate location of these springs to foraging resources. Some of them represent salad buffets, if you will, of aquatic vegetation. That's been altered over time. You saw those pictures from John Moran. They're not real fans. Manatees are not of eating algae. Also, most of the springs tend to be from Florida aquifer water sources as opposed to superficial, and that can be deep or just a shallow Florida. The spring runs tend to be pretty shallow too. They don't particularly like deep water. They're not deep divers, and they don't hold their breath that long. What we tend to find in a lot of our spring systems is that the habitats themselves are altered significantly by human activities. There's a lot of sedimentation in many of our spring runs, by shoreline destabilization over time, human access to the shoreline. And they've been modified in some locations, some dredge and fill activities. So we're trying to focus our efforts on trying to address these concerns in these major primary warm water habitats for manatees. Next slide. Where do they exist? Okay, everybody's been showing this slide, so it's pretty much the same thing. When we look at key focal areas for manatees, they happen in 2 locations. Get that bumping in. Tend to be over in the St. John system. That's where we have a lot of these primary habitats, and that's one of the the sub-management units for manatees, this St. John system. And then over on the Springs Coast in the north central portion of the state, yes. So our focus areas tend to be in these locations where we can actually access some of these springs and work on them pretty readily. We tend to work on springs that are already public property. That's mostly because our funding sources will allow us pretty much only to work on public lands. Some of the federal dollars that we're able to get don't have that restriction, and we work with partners to be able to accomplish these projects pretty effectively. Fanning Springs, great example of a good partner project, and actually one that Dana and our program worked on. Actually, Ron was the project manager for this particular project. Fish and Wildlife Service, DEP, State Parks, FWC, all worked together on this. The St. John's Water Management District, back in the early 2000s, did a spring head restoration project to get the flows up in the system. We removed a lot of rock, placed it off to the side, did some dredging, and deepened that. Very effective. This particular spring system, I don't know how many of y'all have been there before or not. Back in the 1800s, they used to have like a dance hall, bowling facility up at the top of this thing. And people would walk down the banks, very high, steep banks. They brought in a lot of sand to create a nice beach, for people to go down to this area. So, as you can imagine, traversing that slope and going down to the beach where people actually added sand to the system caused it to fill in over time, and the spring run shallowed up. So, one of our efforts was to spend about, what did we spend on this one, Ron? It was about $100,000, wasn't it, total? Yeah. So we spent about that amount of money. We went in and hand hydraulically dredged the old sediments back to the original sediment base in this system. About 500 cubic yards of sediment were removed from the system, and about 10,000 false fingernails, maybe 400 million pieces of gum. I'm trying to remember. Oh, the Band-Aids. That totally freaked me out. When we go up there, they'd come sliming out of that. So anyway, there's a lot of human stuff that was in there, and we actually did find we had to have a cultural artifact observer when we were up there, and anything we found, we'd have to stop operations and be able to look at, because this was a fairly significant early American site. So. But anyway, in the end, we were able to reestablish the deepened channel to allow access for manatees. very effective, and it was a great project. Next slide. Three Sisters Springs. Okay, we're in the process of just about completing this one with the Southwest Florida Water Management District. Great partner, City of Crystal River and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. At this particular site, the shoreline was being undermined by manatees and by human activities. And we went in and used native lime rock, large boulders, and sediment bags to fill in those areas to allow tree roots to grow back in and restabilize that system. I don't have a current picture of this. This is all in the process of having the restoration being completed. But I know that Joyce Palmer, who's going to speak in the next session, actually has an updated version. It's a very attractive looking restoration, and people won't be able to get back in there, nor will manatees be able to excavate their way into the sediments. They get over 300 manatees in that system. Last year they had that many in there, so it's heavily used by those animals. And then looking forward, Warm Mineral Springs, we're working with the Army Corps of Engineers to complete a feasibility study in here, looking at removing about 4,000 to 7,000 cubic yards of sediment. Similar reasons, very popular location, had a beach at the head springs. Those sediments washed down into the spring run. And we're going to try to remove some channel blockages, have done some before already, and again stabilize those banks with native vegetation. So these are just example projects that we are accomplishing with our partners. This one is being done again with the Army Corps right now. We're looking at the local organizations, the county. It's going to be a challenging project because much of the shoreline is actually owned privately. So just examples. We're also looking at working on Blue Spring, and we have a number of projects slated for the future as well as funding and the ability allows. Thank you.